So this question is asking you to work with sequences and nth terms. So we need to remember that when we talk about nth terms for sequences and patterns, then n is always defined as the term number. So in other words, where you are in the sequence. If you was at the fifth term, n would have a value of 5, 20th term, n would have a value of 20, and so forth. So they're saying to you here, we've got to find the value of the fourth term of the sequence. So fourth term is telling me that the n value will be 4. So the sequence rule is 2n squared. We've got to be careful here that we follow the rules of multiplications and powers and bidmass in principle. So if we write this out in full of what it's telling us, it usually can help you to see what's going on. So we're doing 2 lots of n squared, so it's 2 times n times n. N squared means n times n, and we're doing 2 lots of that. So we've got the value of 4. So 2 times 4 times 4. 2 times 4 is 8, times by 4 is 32. So the answer here will be 32. So again, as always, it's just be careful when you're substituting numbers into expressions with squares and timesing. In other words, anything with more than one operation, then follow the order of bidmass. Powers first, so n times n, then double up, because it's turning 2 lots of it. Is 400 a term of this sequence? Well, basically then 2n squared must equal 400. If that's going to be true, so if true, then n will equal a whole number, because term values, because n is defined as the term number, term numbers have to be whole values, so n has to be a whole number. So basically that's what we're trying to prove. We're trying to prove that n is a whole value, and it'll give us an answer of 400. So in other words, it's kind of shouting out at you, please solve me, find out what the value of n is and see whether it's a whole number. And when we're solving, as always, we do the opposite operations to get the value of the letter we need. So we need the value of n. So this says 2 times, so the first thing we're going to do is do the opposite of dividing. So 2 divided by 2 is 1, so that leaves us with 1n squared. 400 divided by 2 is 200. N squared equals 200, so the opposite of squaring is square rooting, so we square root both sides, so n is equal to the square root of 200. And again, you guys are expected to know your square roots up to 225 for whole numbers and square numbers. So the square root of 196 is 14, and the square root of 225 is 15. So the square root of 200 is not a whole number, so n is not a whole number. So 400 cannot be in the sequence. So that would be the mathematical way of kind of showing that 400 is not a term of the sequence. There are other ways that you could have done this question. You could have done a table, and you could have said, well, let's say what happens when n is 10, then 2 times 10 squared is 200. What happens if n is 11, and so forth. And you could have built it up, 2 times 11 squared, well, 11 squared is 121, so 2 lots of that is going to be 242. So you could have built up a table of what's happening as the sequence increases, and then you'd have found that the 14th term would have been below 400, and the 15th term would have been above. So there are a variety of ways of doing that, but solving equations, not too bad really once you understand the principle of dividing and doing the opposite operations when you've got timesing with divide and so forth, and when we've got squares, opposite of that is square rooting, then quite often that will be a more efficient method to find out the answers for solving questions like these.